Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight we are diving into 7 deeply unsettling true new house horror stories that expose what can happen when you step through the door of your dream home, only to discover you are not alone. These are not fabricated tales designed to entertain, but genuine accounts submitted by real people who experienced the unthinkable in places that were supposed to be safe havens. From hidden intruders living in walls and crawl spaces, to threatening letters from watchers who know your every move. Each story has been thoroughly vetted and corroborated through first-hand testimonies and documented evidence. The transition into a new home should mark the beginning of security and comfort, yet for some, it becomes a waking nightmare that follows them long after they escape. If you appreciate authentic horror content rooted in reality rather than fiction, subscribe to Buried Files and enable the notification bell so you never miss our investigations into the terrifying experiences that people face in their own homes. After listening to these chilling encounters, share your thoughts in the comments below and tell us about any unsettling experiences you have had in a new house or apartment. Now, settle in as we explore 7 stories that will make you question the safety of your own 4 walls. Camilla had always dreamed of owning her own home, a place where she could finally establish roots and build the life she had been working towards since graduating college. At 28 years old, she had saved enough for a down payment after years of living frugally in cramped apartments with unreliable roommates. When her company offered her a remote graphic design position with a substantial raise, she knew the time had finally come. She began searching for properties in the Portland suburbs, scrolling through listings every evening after work, imagining herself in each space. Most homes in her price range were either too small or in questionable neighborhoods. But then she found it. A 2-bedroom house with hardwood floors, a functional kitchen, and a backyard that had potential despite being overgrown. The listing price seemed almost too good to be true for the area. But the real estate agent explained it was a foreclosure deal and the bank wanted to move it quickly. Camilla did not hesitate. She made an offer within 24 hours. The closing process moved faster than she expected. And by late September, Camilla stood in the empty living room with her keys in hand, officially a homeowner. The house felt larger without furniture, the hardwood floors creaking slightly beneath her feet as she walked from room to room. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust particles floating in the air. She noticed minor imperfections, scuff marks on the walls, a loose cabinet door in the kitchen, a faint water stain on the ceiling in the hallway, but nothing that worried her. These were cosmetic issues she could address over time. The basement was unfinished but dry, offering plenty of storage space. The backyard needed serious landscaping work, but Camilla could envision flower beds and a small vegetable garden once spring arrived. She spent the first weekend moving in her belongings with help from 2 friends, arranging her modest furniture and unpacking boxes late into the night. The first week passed uneventfully. Camilla established a routine, working from the 2nd bedroom she had converted into a home office, taking breaks to explore the neighborhood and introduce herself to a few nearby residents. Her neighbors were polite but not overly friendly, offering brief waves and small talk before retreating into their own homes. The neighborhood itself was quiet, tree-lined streets with a mix of families and retirees. Camilla felt safe and content. She ordered takeout most evenings, too exhausted from unpacking to cook properly, and fell asleep easily in her new bedroom despite the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around her. Everything felt right. Everything felt like progress. On the 8th night, Camilla woke abruptly at 2:17 in the morning. She lay still in the darkness, unsure what had pulled her from sleep. Then she heard it, a scratching sound coming from inside the wall behind her headboard. It was faint but deliberate, a rhythmic scraping that lasted perhaps 30 seconds before stopping. Camilla turned on her bedside lamp and stared at the wall, heart beating faster than normal. She reasoned it was probably mice or some other small creature that had found its way into the walls. Old houses had these problems. She made a mental note to call an exterminator in the morning and eventually fell back asleep. The scratching returned the following night at nearly the same time, just after 2 in the morning. This time it was louder, more insistent, as though whatever was inside the wall was trying to break through. Camilla sat up in bed, listening intently. The sound moved slightly, traveling along the wall from left to right before stopping near the corner of the room. She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it at the wall, but saw nothing unusual. No holes, no cracks, no visible signs of intrusion. The scratching stopped after a few minutes, leaving Camilla wide awake and uneasy. She considered calling someone, but felt foolish. What would she say? That she heard scratching in the walls? People would tell her it was just mice or settling pipes. She tried to convince herself of the same. By the end of the second week, the nightly scratching had become routine. It occurred every night between 2 and 3 in the morning, sometimes lasting only a minute, other times continuing for 10 or 15 minutes. Camilla tried wearing earplugs to bed, but the sound was too persistent, too deliberate. She also began noticing other oddities around the house. Small items went missing: a coffee mug she had left on the kitchen counter, her hairbrush from the bathroom, a single sock that disappeared from the dryer. She assumed she was simply misplacing things in the chaos of settling into a new space. But a nagging feeling of wrongness began to take root in the back of her mind. One afternoon, during her 3rd week in the house, Camilla went upstairs after working in her office and found the basement door standing wide open. She distinctly remembered locking it that morning because the basement made her uncomfortable. It was dark and musty, and she had no reason to go down there regularly. She closed the door and locked it again, checking the handle twice to ensure it was secure. The next day, the door was open again. Camilla stood at the top of the basement stairs, staring down into the darkness, fear beginning to creep up her spine. Something was wrong. Something was very wrong. She flipped on the basement light and slowly descended the wooden stairs, each step groaning under her weight. The basement looked exactly as she remembered. Concrete floor covered in patches of dust, exposed wooden beams overhead, boxes of her belongings stacked against one wall, old water heater humming in the corner. Nothing appeared disturbed. Camilla walked the perimeter of the space, shining her phone flashlight into dark corners. That was when she noticed something she had missed during her initial home inspection. A small door set into the far wall, partially obscured by an old wooden shelf. The door was only about 3 feet high, clearly leading to a crawl space beneath another section of the house. Camilla approached it slowly, her pulse quickening. The crawl space door was slightly ajar. She knelt down and pulled the door open wider, shining her flashlight inside. The crawl space extended back about 20 feet, the ceiling too low to stand upright. The floor was dirt and dust, and Camilla could see footprints, fresh footprints leading deeper into the space. Her blood turned to ice. Someone had been down here, recently, within the past few days, judging by the clarity of the prints. Against every instinct screaming at her to leave, Camilla crawled into the cramped space, following the footprints. After about 10 feet, she found evidence that made her stomach drop. Empty food wrappers, granola bar packages, potato chip bags, plastic water bottles. They were not old and dusty. They were recent. Some of the water bottles still had condensation on the inside. Camilla crawled deeper, her hands shaking, her breath coming in short gasps. The crawl space opened into a slightly larger area where someone could sit, hunched over. A sleeping bag lay crumpled in the corner, and when Camilla touched it, the fabric was still warm. Someone had been sleeping here. Recently, possibly within the last few hours. Taped to the dirt walls were photographs, dozens of them. Camilla's horror intensified as she realized they were photographs of her house. The exterior from various angles, the windows, the back door, the driveway. And then she saw photographs taken from inside the house. Her living room, her kitchen, her bedroom. One photograph showed her sleeping in her bed, taken from the doorway. The angle suggested someone had been standing in her bedroom doorway in the middle of the night, watching her sleep. Camilla scrambled backward out of the crawl space, scraping her knees and elbows in her panic to escape. She burst out of the basement and ran upstairs, locking herself in her bedroom. Her entire body shook violently as she tried to process what she had discovered. Someone had been living in her crawl space. Someone had been inside her house while she slept. Someone had been watching her, taking photographs. The scratching in the walls suddenly made horrifying sense. It was not mice. It was a person moving through the crawl space, scratching at the walls from inside the structure of the house. Camilla wanted to vomit. She wanted to scream. Instead, she forced herself to think logically. She needed evidence. She needed proof. She needed to catch whoever was doing this. That afternoon, Camilla drove to an electronics store and purchased a motion-activated security camera. She returned home before dark and installed it in the basement, positioning it to capture anyone entering or exiting the crawl space. She also pushed heavy furniture against her bedroom door and kept her phone fully charged on her nightstand, ready to call the police at any moment. That night, Camilla did not sleep. She lay in bed, staring at her phone, watching the live feed from the basement camera. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning. At 2:47, movement appeared on the screen. Camilla watched in frozen horror as a thin man emerged from the crawl space. He was perhaps in his early 40s, wearing dirty jeans and a stained t-shirt. His hair was unkempt, his face gaunt. He moved with unsettling familiarity through the basement, clearly comfortable in the space. He walked to the stairs and ascended slowly, carefully, clearly trying to minimize noise. Camilla could hear the stairs creaking faintly through her ceiling. She gripped her phone tighter, her other hand hovering over the emergency call button. The man walked through the first floor of the house. Camilla could hear him moving around below her, opening the refrigerator, running the kitchen sink, using the bathroom. After about 15 minutes, footsteps approached her bedroom. They stopped directly outside her door. Camilla held her breath, not daring to move. Through the camera feed, she watched the basement, but the man was no longer visible. He was upstairs, right outside her bedroom door. She could hear him breathing on the other side, standing there, listening. The doorknob turned slightly, testing the lock. Camilla felt tears streaming down her face. Her heart pounded so violently, she thought it might burst. The man stood outside her door for 11 minutes. Camilla timed it. 11 minutes of standing in her hallway, just listening to her, deciding what to do. Finally, the footsteps retreated. Camilla watched the camera feed as the man reappeared in the basement, walking casually back to the crawl space. He disappeared inside, pulling the small door closed behind him. Camilla immediately called the police, her voice barely above a whisper. She explained everything: the scratching, the missing items, the crawl space, the photographs, the camera footage. Police arrived within 12 minutes, surrounding the house. 4 officers entered with flashlights and weapons drawn. They found the man exactly where Camilla said he would be. Inside the crawl space, surrounded by his sleeping bag and stolen food and photographs. He did not resist arrest. He simply sat there as officers pulled him out, staring at the ground with an expression Camilla would never forget. Not anger, not fear, just sadness, as though he had lost something precious. The police questioned him for hours. He eventually revealed that he was the previous owner of the house. He had lived there for 12 years before losing it to foreclosure after a series of financial disasters. He had been unable to accept the loss. After the bank took possession and before Camilla purchased the property, he had returned and created a hidden living space in the crawl space. When Camilla moved in, he simply stayed, watching her, convinced that if he remained hidden long enough, she would eventually leave and he could reclaim his home. He had been living in the crawl space for 3 weeks before Camilla discovered him. He had been entering the main house almost every night while she slept, eating her food, using her bathroom, standing outside her bedroom door, watching her. Neighbors later told police that the man had made disturbing comments after losing the house, saying he would never really leave and that the house would always be his. Camilla moved out within 48 hours. She could not spend another moment in that house. Friends helped her pack her belongings and find a short-term apartment rental while she figured out her next steps. She listed the house for sale but was legally required to disclose what had happened, making it nearly impossible to sell at a reasonable price. She eventually sold it at a significant loss just to be free of it. The man was charged with breaking and entering, stalking, burglary, and trespassing. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Even now, years later, Camilla struggles with the aftermath. She lives in a secured apartment building with cameras and a doorman, but she sleeps poorly. She checks every closet, every storage space, every crawl space obsessively before going to bed. She keeps multiple cameras running in her apartment at all times, watching the feeds compulsively throughout the day. Therapy has helped somewhat, but the paranoia remains. The knowledge that someone was watching her sleep, standing outside her bedroom door night after night, touching her belongings, living in the walls of her home, it has permanently changed her. She will never feel truly safe again. The dream of homeownership, once so appealing, now feels like a nightmare she barely escaped. Gabriel and his wife Sarah had been searching for their first home for nearly 2 years. With 2 young children, ages 4 and 6, they had outgrown their cramped 2-bedroom apartment and desperately needed more space. Every weekend they toured properties, each one either too expensive, too small, or in neighborhoods that did not feel right for raising a family. They had nearly given up hope when their real estate agent called about a listing that had just come on the market, a 3-bedroom colonial in a quiet cul-de-sac in suburban Ohio. The house was built in the early 1980s and showed its age in some cosmetic ways. But it had good bones, a large backyard with a privacy fence, and most importantly, it was within their budget. Gabriel and Sarah viewed the property on a Saturday morning and made an offer by that evening. The closing process took 6 weeks, during which Gabriel and Sarah planned every detail of their new life. They chose paint colors for each room, measured spaces for furniture, and discussed which bedroom would belong to each child. Their son wanted the room with the window facing the backyard. Their daughter wanted the room closest to the master bedroom because she still sometimes had nightmares. Gabriel worked from home as a software developer, which meant he would be present during the day, while Sarah commuted to her job in the city 3 days per week. They closed on the house in early June, right as summer was beginning. Perfect timing for the children to explore their new neighborhood before school started in the fall. The first 2 weeks were everything they had hoped for. Gabriel set up his home office in the spare bedroom. Sarah organized the kitchen exactly how she wanted it. The children made friends with other kids on the street, spending long afternoons riding bikes and playing in yards. The neighborhood felt safe and welcoming. Families waved to each other in the mornings. People maintained their lawns and homes. There were block parties and holiday decorations. Gabriel and Sarah congratulated themselves on making such a wise investment. This was the life they had worked so hard to build. On the 15th night in their new home, Gabriel woke at 3 in the morning to use the bathroom. He was groggy and half asleep as he walked down the hallway. But something caught his attention as he descended the stairs. There were muddy footprints on the hardwood floor. They started at the back door and led through the kitchen, stopping at the bottom of the staircase. Gabriel froze, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. He had not come downstairs since going to bed at 11. Sarah had not either. The children were too small to reach the back door lock. He turned on the kitchen light and examined the footprints more closely. They were large, clearly from an adult man, the mud still damp. Gabriel checked the back door and found it unlocked. He distinctly remembered locking it before bed. He always checked the doors. Always. Gabriel searched the first floor thoroughly, checking every room, every closet, his heart pounding. Nothing appeared missing or disturbed beyond the muddy footprints. He woke Sarah and showed her the evidence. They debated calling the police, but ultimately decided against it. What would they report? Someone had unlocked their door and walked through their kitchen but had not stolen anything or caused damage. It seemed almost foolish. Gabriel cleaned up the mud and resolved to install a deadbolt on the back door the following day. Sarah suggested they get a security system. Gabriel agreed. Neither of them slept well for the rest of that night. The deadbolt was installed by noon the next day. Gabriel also checked every window in the house, ensuring they all locked properly. He felt somewhat reassured. That night, he and Sarah went to bed with the house secured. Gabriel lay awake for over an hour, listening to every sound. But eventually exhaustion won, and he drifted into uneasy sleep. 3 nights later, Sarah shook Gabriel awake at 2:30 in the morning. Her face was pale, her hand trembling as she gripped his arm. Someone had knocked on their bedroom window. Gabriel sat up, confused. Their bedroom was on the 2nd floor. Sarah insisted she had heard it clearly, 3 deliberate knocks on the glass. Gabriel got out of bed and went to the window, pulling back the curtain. The motion sensor light in the backyard had been triggered. In the harsh white light, Gabriel saw a figure standing in the middle of their lawn. The person wore dark clothing and a white mask that covered their entire face. They stood perfectly still, facing the house, staring up at the bedroom window. Gabriel felt ice flood his veins. He and the masked figure stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 seconds. Then Gabriel grabbed his phone and called the police. The figure did not move, did not run, just stood there, motionless, as Gabriel spoke to the emergency dispatcher. Sarah pulled the children into the master bedroom and locked the door, while Gabriel watched the figure from the window. The standoff continued for 15 minutes until Gabriel heard sirens in the distance. Only then did the figure move, walking calmly toward the back fence and disappearing over it with practiced ease. By the time police officers arrived and searched the property, The person was gone. Officers found footprints in the yard and noted them in their report. But there was little else they could do. No crime had technically been committed. Someone had stood in Gabriel's backyard. That was not illegal. The officers suggested motion-activated cameras and more lighting. Gabriel thanked them, and they left. The following week brought a series of increasingly disturbing incidents. Gabriel woke one morning to find all of their garden gnomes, 7 of them that the previous owners had left behind, arranged in a perfect circle in the center of the backyard. He had not moved them. Sarah had not moved them. Someone had entered their property during the night and rearranged their lawn decorations. 2 nights later, Gabriel heard sounds from the backyard at 4 a.m. He looked out to see their 3 trash cans stacked in a pyramid in the middle of the lawn. The next morning, Sarah discovered a smiley face spray-painted on their fence in bright yellow paint. Each incident was bizarre and unsettling, but not overtly threatening. Gabriel called the police after each occurrence, but there was little they could do beyond increased patrols in the neighborhood. Gabriel spent over $2,000 installing a comprehensive security system with cameras covering every angle of the property, motion sensors, floodlights. He became obsessed with monitoring the feeds, checking them dozens of times throughout the day and night. Sarah worried about his mental state. The children sensed the tension and became anxious and clingy. The neighborhood that had seemed so perfect now felt hostile and threatening. Other neighbors claimed to have seen and heard nothing unusual. Gabriel began to wonder if they were being targeted specifically. But why? What had they done? Then came the night that Gabriel would never be able to forget, the night that convinced them they had to leave. It was a Tuesday, just after 1:30 in the morning. Sarah shook Gabriel awake urgently, her eyes wide with terror. She pointed toward the backyard without saying a word. Gabriel went to the window and looked out. His mind struggled to comprehend what he was seeing. 5 people stood in their backyard, arranged in a semicircle facing the house. All 5 wore white coverings over their faces, masks or hoods. Gabriel could not tell which. They stood about 10 feet apart from each other, forming an arc across the lawn. And they were moving. The movements were synchronized and deeply unnatural. They swayed and jerked in unison, their bodies contorting in ways that seemed wrong, mechanical, like broken puppets controlled by invisible strings. Their arms bent at odd angles, their heads tilted in sharp, sudden movements. They did not look human. They looked like something pretending to be human and failing. The dance continued for several minutes, the 5 figures moving in perfect synchronization. Their white-covered faces pointed directly at the bedroom window, where Gabriel and Sarah watched in paralyzed horror. Neither of them could move. Neither could speak. They simply stood there, holding each other, watching the nightmare unfold in their backyard. After approximately 4 minutes, the dancers stopped simultaneously. They stood perfectly still, arms at their sides, facing the house. The silence felt heavier than the movement had been. Gabriel could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. Sarah was shaking violently beside him. Then, in perfect unison, all 5 figures turned their heads to face the bedroom window directly. Even from that distance, Gabriel felt the weight of their stare. It was not random. It was not a prank. This was directed. This was personal. This was a message. Something inside Gabriel snapped. Rage replaced fear. He grabbed the largest kitchen knife from the drawer and ran downstairs, screaming incoherently. He unlocked the back door and charged into the yard, brandishing the knife, yelling at the figures to get off his property. The effect was immediate. All 5 figures broke formation and ran, scattering in different directions. They moved with surprising speed and agility, vaulting over fences into neighboring yards, disappearing into the darkness within seconds. Gabriel stood alone in his backyard, breathing heavily, knife in hand, shaking with adrenaline and fury and fear. Sarah called the police from the bedroom window. Officers arrived within 8 minutes and searched the neighborhood thoroughly. They found no sign of the intruders. No one in neighboring houses reported seeing or hearing anything unusual. Security camera footage confirmed everything Gabriel and Sarah described, but the video quality was not clear enough to identify any of the 5 figures. They wore generic dark clothing and white coverings that obscured all identifying features. Police could do nothing without suspects. They filed another report and left. Gabriel did not sleep for the remainder of that night. He sat in the living room with the kitchen knife across his lap, watching the security feeds until sunrise. The incident stopped immediately after that night. Completely. No more footprints, no more rearranged items, no more figures in the yard. Gabriel and Sarah installed additional cameras, maxing out 2 credit cards in the process. The house was now covered with so much security equipment that it looked like a fortress. But the fear did not diminish. If anything, it intensified. The children refused to play in the backyard. Sarah could not sleep without medication. Gabriel became increasingly paranoid, checking and rechecking locks and camera feeds obsessively. They tried to sell the house after 6 months, but found few interested buyers. The security system itself was a red flag that something was wrong. They eventually sold at a significant loss and moved to a gated community with professional security guards and controlled access. Gabriel later reached out to the previous owners, the family who had sold them the house. After initial reluctance, they admitted they had also experienced strange incidents during their final year in the home. People standing in the yard at night, items being rearranged. They had not disclosed this during the sale because they were desperate to leave and feared it would prevent them from selling. Gabriel felt betrayed and furious, but also vindicated. This had been happening long before his family moved in. They were not crazy. They were not imagining things. Someone or some group had been terrorizing residents of that house for reasons Gabriel would never understand. Years have passed, but Gabriel still struggles with the aftermath. His youngest child, now 10 years old, developed a severe fear of windows and refuses to sleep in any room without blackout curtains that completely block the view from outside. Sarah takes anxiety medication and sees a therapist regularly. Gabriel checks security camera feeds compulsively, even though they live in one of the safest communities in the state. He cannot shake the memory of those 5 figures moving in his backyard, their synchronized dance of wrongness, their blank white faces turned toward his window. He wakes several times each night, convinced he hears sounds outside. The dream of owning a home in a quiet neighborhood has been permanently shattered. Safety, Gabriel has learned, is an illusion that can be destroyed by forces you will never understand and can never escape. Riley and her husband Marcus had lived in the same cramped apartment for the first 5 years of their marriage, always talking about buying a house but never quite able to afford one in their city. When Marcus received a job offer in rural New Mexico with a substantial salary increase, they saw it as an opportunity to finally make their dream a reality. The cost of living was dramatically lower, and property values were a fraction of what they had been paying in rent. Within 3 weeks of Marcus accepting the position, they were touring homes online, amazed at what their budget could purchase. They settled on a spacious 3-bedroom house on 5 acres of land, priced well below market value. The listing explained that the sellers were motivated due to a family relocation, and the house needed some cosmetic updates but was structurally sound. The house was built in the early 1970s with that era's distinctive architecture. Wood paneling in some rooms, avocado-colored bathroom fixtures, shag carpeting in the bedrooms. Riley found it charming in a nostalgic way, and she knew they could update it gradually over time. The property itself was breathtaking. 5 acres of open land stretched in every direction, with views of distant mountains and enormous skies that seemed to go on forever. The nearest neighbor was half a mile away. The isolation felt peaceful and liberating after years of hearing neighbors through thin apartment walls. They closed on the property in late August and moved in with their black Labrador, Lola, who immediately loved having so much space to run. Marcus began his new job while Riley continued working remotely for her previous employer, a software company that had agreed to let her keep her position as long as she maintained her productivity. The first 2 weeks were spent unpacking, arranging furniture, and beginning the process of making the house feel like their own. Riley spent her days working from the second bedroom she had converted into a home office, taking breaks to walk Lola around the property. Marcus commuted 40 minutes each way to the nearest town where his company was located. The commute was long, but he did not mind, especially knowing he was coming home to their own house on their own land. They talked about eventually getting chickens, maybe a few goats, creating a small homestead. The possibilities felt endless. During their second week in the house, Riley decided to explore the basement more thoroughly. She had only been down there once during the home inspection, and that had been a brief walkthrough focused on checking the foundation and mechanical systems. The basement was partially finished with concrete floors and exposed beams, used primarily for storage and housing the water heater and electrical panel. Riley was taking measurements for potential storage shelving when she noticed a door she had not registered during her first visit. It was set into the far wall, constructed of heavy steel rather than the hollow wood doors found throughout the rest of the house. The door had an industrial deadbolt lock, the kind you might find on a commercial building or a safe room. It was locked from the outside, with no key in sight. Riley called Marcus over that evening to look at the strange door. He examined it with curiosity, testing the lock and knocking on the steel surface. The door was solid and heavy, clearly installed with serious intent. Marcus speculated that it might be a tornado shelter or panic room, both of which would make sense in this part of the country. Riley was not satisfied with that explanation. Something about the door unsettled her in a way she could not articulate. She wanted to know what was behind it. Marcus was less interested, focused on other projects around the house. But Riley became increasingly fixated on the locked room. She searched the house for keys, checked drawers and closets, looked through papers left by the previous owners. Nothing. After a week of obsessing over the mystery, Riley convinced Marcus to hire a locksmith. Marcus thought it was unnecessary, but agreed to humor her. The locksmith arrived on a Thursday afternoon, a quiet man in his 60s who had been working in the area for decades. He examined the lock and let out a low whistle, commenting that it was an unusual level of security for a residential basement. He mentioned that the lock appeared designed to keep someone in rather than to keep intruders out. The comment sent a chill through Riley, but she told him to proceed. The locksmith worked for over 90 minutes, using various tools and techniques, muttering to himself about the complexity of the mechanism. Finally, with a solid click, the lock disengaged. The locksmith collected his payment and left, warning Riley and Marcus to be careful exploring whatever was inside. Marcus pulled open the heavy door, and immediately a wave of stale, suffocating air rushed out. The smell was musty and old, like opening a tomb. The room beyond was approximately 10 feet by 12 feet, with no windows and a single bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling. Riley reached in and pulled the light chain. The bulb flickered to life, casting harsh shadows across the space. Both Riley and Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, trying to comprehend what they were seeing. The walls were covered entirely in black and white photographs, dozens of them, maybe over 100. Some were tacked directly to the drywall, others taped or glued. Every single photograph had been defaced. Strange symbols were drawn over them in red marker or paint, circles, crosses, spirals, patterns that looked almost like writing, but in no language Riley recognized. Many of the photographs showed the house itself, taken from various angles and distances. Exterior shots of the front, the back, the sides. Some appeared to be from years ago based on the quality and the different landscaping visible. Other photographs showed people Riley did not recognize. Families, children, individuals. Their faces were scratched out with deep gouges or circled over and over in red until the features were obscured. Some faces had been completely torn away, leaving ragged holes in the photographs. In the center of the room sat a single wooden chair, facing one blank section of wall. The seat was worn smooth, the wood darkened where countless hours of sitting had polished the surface. A cot occupied one corner of the room, a crumpled blanket and flat pillows suggesting recent use. Riley stepped into the room, her heart pounding. Marcus stayed in the doorway, visibly disturbed. Riley walked slowly around the perimeter, examining the photographs more closely. Some showed the interior of the house, the living room, the kitchen, the bedrooms. Had the previous owners taken these? Why? What was this room for? Riley noticed details on the cot that made her blood run cold. Empty chip bags, crumpled water bottles, protein bar wrappers. The trash was not old and dusty. It was recent. Within days, maybe a week. Someone had been in this room recently. Someone had been living in here. But the room had been locked from the outside, which meant someone had locked them in. Riley examined the door from the inside and found deep scratch marks around the lock mechanism, gouges in the metal where someone had desperately tried to escape. Panic began to rise in her chest. She rushed out of the room and up the basement stairs, calling for Lola. Marcus followed, his face pale. They sat at the kitchen table, trying to make sense of what they had found. Marcus wanted to call the police. But what would they say? They found a strange room in their basement, with old photographs and trash. No bodies, no weapons, no obvious crime. Riley researched the previous owners online, trying to find contact information. Their phone number was disconnected. No forwarding address existed in any public records. The real estate agent who had sold them the house did not have current information for the sellers either. That night, Riley and Marcus pushed furniture against the basement door and installed a padlock from the outside, sealing off access to the basement entirely. They tried to sleep, but both lay awake, listening to every sound. At 11:30, Lola began barking furiously downstairs. Then came the pounding. Someone was hammering on the front door with tremendous force. The impact so violent, Riley thought the door might break. Marcus grabbed his phone and dialed the police, while Riley held Lola back from running downstairs. The pounding continued for nearly 2 minutes, echoing through the house. Then it stopped. Silence. Marcus and Riley waited in their bedroom, frozen. At 2 a.m, they heard glass shattering somewhere downstairs. A window. Someone had broken one of their windows. Marcus ran downstairs with a baseball bat in time to see 2 figures fleeing across their property into the darkness, beyond the reach of their porch lights. The kitchen window was completely shattered, glass covering the counter and floor. Police arrived within 20 minutes, which felt like an eternity. Officers searched the property but found no one. They examined the basement room and took photographs, noting the strangeness of it, but unable to identify any specific crime. They theorized that whoever had been locked in that room, or whoever had locked someone in that room, had returned to the property. Perhaps they did not know the house had been sold. Perhaps they panicked when they realized the room had been opened. The officers filed a report, but could not make any arrests without suspects or evidence. Riley and Marcus hired a private security company the next day, installing motion sensors and cameras across the entire property. They removed everything from the sealed room and hired contractors to fill it completely with concrete, permanently sealing it. The work took 3 days and cost over $4,000, but Riley insisted. She could not live in the house knowing that room existed. Even with it filled, she struggled to feel safe. Marcus began working from home to keep Riley company. They purchased firearms and took safety courses. They trained Lola to alert them to any unusual sounds or movements. They listed the house for sale after 3 months, but received no serious offers. Most potential buyers were put off by the extreme security measures, sensing something was wrong even if they did not know the full story. Riley rarely sleeps more than a few hours each night. Every sound makes her jump. She keeps a loaded handgun in her nightstand and checks the security camera feeds compulsively throughout the day. Marcus has grown quieter, more withdrawn, carrying the weight of knowing he brought his wife to this place. They do not talk about the room anymore, but it is always there between them, the unspoken horror that changed their lives. Riley wonders who was in that room, who locked them there, why the photographs were defaced, what the symbols meant. She will never have answers, and that might be the worst part of all, the not knowing, the constant fear that whoever was involved might return, the knowledge that their dream home became their nightmare, and they are trapped here, unable to sell, unable to leave, unable to ever feel truly safe again. Caleb signed the lease on his first solo apartment during the coldest part of January, relieved to finally escape the chaotic living situation he had endured for the past 3 years. Roommates had seemed like a practical necessity when he first moved to Portland, Maine, fresh out of college with student loan debt and an entry-level position at a marketing firm. He had cycled through various living arrangements, each one deteriorating for different reasons. One roommate never paid utilities on time. Another left dirty dishes for weeks. The most recent had a girlfriend who essentially moved in without contributing to rent, turning the 2-bedroom apartment into an uncomfortable 3-person situation. When Caleb received a promotion at work, his first decision was to find his own place, somewhere quiet where he could finally have complete control over his environment. The apartment he found was in a converted Victorian building on the east side of the city, not far from the waterfront. The building was over 100 years old, but had been meticulously maintained, divided into 6 units across 3 floors. Caleb's apartment was on the 3rd floor. A cozy 1-bedroom with exposed brick walls, high ceilings with original crown molding, and large windows overlooking a quiet residential street lined with mature oak trees. The rent was slightly higher than he wanted to pay, but the charm of the space and the respectful nature of the other tenants convinced him it was worth the stretch. His neighbors were quiet professionals, a couple in their 30s on the 2nd floor, an elderly woman who lived alone on the 1st floor, and 2 other units occupied by people Caleb rarely saw but never heard. The building felt peaceful and safe. Caleb moved in on a Saturday, carrying boxes up 3 flights of narrow stairs with help from his brother. They spent the day arranging furniture, hanging pictures, and setting up the small kitchen. By evening, Caleb was exhausted but satisfied. He ordered pizza, drank a beer while sitting on his new couch, and felt genuinely content for the first time in months. This was his space, his rules, his peace. He went to bed early that night, falling asleep quickly in the unfamiliar bedroom. On his fourth night in the apartment, Caleb woke abruptly at 3:14 in the morning. He lay in the darkness, disoriented, trying to determine what had pulled him from sleep. Then he heard it, knocking. 3 distinct knocks coming from inside the wall behind his headboard. Not from the apartment next door or from pipes running through the walls, but from within the wall itself. The sound was deliberate and measured. 3 knocks, a pause of approximately 5 seconds, then 3 more knocks. Caleb sat up in bed, staring at the wall. The knocking continued for another minute before stopping abruptly. Silence returned to the apartment. Caleb convinced himself it was pipes expanding or contracting due to temperature changes, something mundane and explainable. He went back to sleep, though it took longer than usual. The knocking returned the following night. Same time, same wall. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. The pattern repeated for nearly 20 minutes before ceasing. Caleb turned on his bedside lamp and examined the wall closely, running his hands over the plaster, looking for cracks or loose sections. Everything felt solid and normal. He knocked on the wall himself 3 times experimentally, wondering if a neighbor would respond. Nothing. Just silence. He mentioned the strange sounds to the building manager the next morning, describing the knocking pattern. The manager promised to investigate, suggesting it might be an issue with the radiator system or water pipes. Caleb felt somewhat reassured, but the knocking did not stop. Every night for the next week, between 3 and 4 in the morning, the knocking would begin. Sometimes it came from the bedroom wall, other times from the living room or bathroom. The pattern remained consistent: 3 deliberate knocks, a pause, 3 more knocks. Caleb began losing sleep, lying awake anticipating the sounds, unable to relax. He researched the building's history online and discovered that a tenant had died in his unit 15 years prior. The article he found mentioned natural causes, a heart attack, nothing suspicious or unusual. An elderly man living alone who had not been discovered for several days. Caleb tried to dismiss any supernatural explanations, but the information unsettled him nevertheless. The knocking intensified during the second week. One night it seemed to follow Caleb from room to room. He stood in the kitchen making tea, and knocking began in the wall behind him. He walked to the bathroom, and knocking started in the bathroom wall. He returned to the bedroom, and the sound moved with him, always just behind wherever he stood. Caleb felt a growing sense of dread that something was trying to communicate with him, something that existed within the walls of his apartment. He began sleeping with headphones on, playing white noise to drown out the sounds. But even through the audio, he could feel vibrations through his mattress, a rhythmic pulsing that matched the knocking pattern. 2 weeks into this torment, Caleb decided to document what was happening. He set up his phone to record video overnight, positioning it to capture both himself sleeping and the wall where the knocking originated. He forced himself to go to bed at his normal time, despite his anxiety. At 3:14 in the morning, the recording captured everything. Caleb watched the footage the next day during his lunch break at work, and what he saw made his blood run cold. On the video, he watched himself sit up in bed at exactly 3:14. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring straight ahead as though he was sleepwalking or in some kind of trance. Then, moving with mechanical precision, he turned toward the wall and, knocked 3 times. The sound was clearly audible on the recording. Immediately, 3 knocks responded from within the wall. Caleb's recorded self knocked again, 3 times. 6 rapid knocks responded from the wall, frantic and aggressive. Then Caleb's body lay back down and appeared to resume sleeping. He had absolutely no memory of any of this. No awareness of waking up, moving, knocking. Nothing. Caleb felt sick watching the video. Something was compelling him to respond to the knocking, using his own body to communicate while his conscious mind remained unaware. That night, Caleb forced himself to stay awake. He drank coffee, paced his apartment, did everything possible to remain alert. At 3 in the morning, the knocking began. Caleb felt a powerful compulsion to approach the wall. It was not a desire, but a command, something external trying to control his movements. He actively resisted, gripping the edge of his kitchen counter, fighting the urge to walk to the bedroom. The knocking became violent and chaotic, pounding from multiple locations throughout the apartment simultaneously. The walls themselves seemed to shake. Caleb could hear his neighbors stirring, someone shouting from the floor below, asking what the noise was. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. Complete silence. Caleb packed a bag that night and left the apartment, going to stay with his brother. He called the building manager in the morning and informed him he was breaking his lease effective immediately. The manager was unsympathetic, citing the lease agreement and threatening to pursue legal action if Caleb did not fulfill his obligations. Caleb did not care. He forfeited his security deposit, paid 2 months of additional rent as penalty, and refused to return to the apartment except to collect his belongings with his brother, present during daylight hours. Even during that brief visit, Caleb felt the oppressive presence of something watching him, waiting for night to fall so it could resume its communication attempts. A few months later, Caleb encountered a former tenant of the building by chance at a coffee shop downtown. When Caleb mentioned which apartment he had lived in, the man's expression changed immediately. He told Caleb that he had also lived in that unit years earlier and had experienced similar phenomena. The knocking, the compulsion to respond. He described how the previous tenant, the man who had died there, had been a recluse who would bang on the walls whenever neighbors made any noise. The man had been obsessed with silence, with control over his environment. He would knock on walls, on floors, on ceilings, demanding quiet from everyone around him. After his death, the knocking had continued. Several tenants had moved out over the years because of it. The building manager knew about the problem, but never disclosed it to new renters. Caleb still experiences the effects of his time in that apartment. He lives with his brother, now unable to commit to his own place again. Occasionally, in the middle of the night, he feels the compulsion to knock on walls. The urge comes suddenly and powerfully, and Caleb has to actively resist it. He sees a therapist who specializes in trauma, though he has never fully explained the specifics of what happened. He takes medication for anxiety and sleep disturbances. He cannot tolerate being in old buildings, particularly Victorians, and refuses to live anywhere built before the year 2000. The experience has left him with a persistent paranoia that walls are not solid barriers, but permeable spaces where things can exist and watch and wait. He avoids apartments entirely now, preferring ground floor spaces with minimal shared walls. The knocking haunts him still, not as an external sound, but as an internal compulsion, a command encoded into his nervous system by something that refused to leave that apartment, even in death. Caleb wonders if he will ever be free of it, or if some part of him will always be responding to knocks that only he can hear. trapped in a dialogue with something that should not exist but undeniably does. Lily was 11 years old when her parents divorced, and her world changed completely. Her mother was granted primary custody, and they moved out of the family home into a small apartment building on the other side of town. The building was older, 3 stories tall with 2 apartments per floor facing each other across narrow hallways. Lily's mother worked as a nurse at the county hospital, often pulling double shifts to make ends meet, which meant Lily spent many hours alone in the apartment after school. The place was modest but adequate. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a living room with a window that overlooked the street. It was not home, not yet, but Lily tried to adjust. She missed her father and her old school and her old friends, but her mother told her they would make the best of their new situation. During the first few months, Lily rarely saw the other residents of the building. People kept to themselves, coming and going at different hours, offering polite nods but little conversation. The apartment directly across the hallway from theirs remained a mystery. Lily occasionally heard sounds from behind the door, footsteps, a television, dogs barking, but she never saw who lived there. Her mother mentioned in passing that a man lived there alone with 2 large dogs, but she had only encountered him once or twice in the stairwell. He seemed harmless enough, quiet and reserved. Lily did not think much about him. She had her own adjustment to focus on, navigating a new school and trying to make friends in an environment where everyone already had established social groups. It was during the 3rd month in the apartment that Lily began seeing the neighbor more frequently. The building had a small shared garden area in the back. Nothing elaborate, just a patch of grass with a few benches and some overgrown bushes. Lily sometimes went there to read after school, enjoying the fresh air and temporary escape from the apartment's cramped quarters. One afternoon in May, she was sitting on a bench with a library book when she noticed the neighbor from across the hall. He was standing near the edge of the garden with his 2 dogs, large animals that looked like German shepherds or perhaps some kind of mixed breed. The man was watching her, not casually glancing in her direction, but staring with an intensity that made Lily profoundly uncomfortable. She could not articulate exactly what felt wrong about his stare. She was only 11 and did not have the vocabulary or experience to identify predatory behavior, but some instinct deep in her brain recognized danger. The way his eyes remained fixed on her, the way he did not look away when she made eye contact, the slight smile that did not reach his eyes. Everything about his presence felt wrong. Lily closed her book and went back inside, her heart beating faster than normal. She told herself she was being silly, that he was just a neighbor looking around the garden. But the feeling of unease persisted. After that day, the man seemed to be everywhere. When Lily came home from school, he would be in the hallway, positioned near his door, always appearing just as she walked up the stairs. He never spoke to her directly, just watched with that same unsettling smile. When Lily took out the trash, he would be in the parking lot. When she walked to the corner store for her mother, he would be on the sidewalk. The encounters felt deliberate, timed, as though he was monitoring her schedule. Lily mentioned it to her mother once, saying the neighbor made her uncomfortable, but her mother was exhausted from a 12-hour shift and brushed it off. Lily was probably imagining things. The man was just a neighbor. He had never done anything threatening. Lily did not bring it up again, not wanting to worry her mother or sound paranoid. Then, one evening, approximately 2 weeks after the initial garden encounter, there was a knock on their apartment door. Lily was in her room doing homework while her mother prepared dinner in the kitchen. She heard her mother open the door and exchange greetings with someone. Then the conversation became strange. Lily could not hear every word, but she caught fragments. The neighbor was offering to buy things for Lily: toys, clothes, other items. Then Lily heard a word that made her stomach drop: underwear. The neighbor was asking if he could buy underwear for Lily. Lily heard her mother's voice change immediately, going from polite confusion to sharp alarm. She told the neighbor to leave. Now, get out. Do not ever approach their door again. Do not speak to Lily. Stay away from them. The door slammed hard enough to shake the walls. Lily sat frozen at her desk, pencil still in hand, trying to process what had just happened. Her mother came into her room a few minutes later, trying to appear calm, but clearly shaken. She told Lily to never speak to the neighbor, to never be alone in the hallway with him, to come straight home from school and lock the door immediately. If he ever approached her, Lily was to scream and run. Her mother did not elaborate on why, but Lily understood. The man was dangerous. The feeling of wrongness she had sensed was real. The weeks that followed were marked by constant vigilance. Lily became hyper-aware of every sound in the hallway, every footstep, every door opening or closing. She developed a routine of rushing up the stairs and into the apartment as quickly as possible, locking the deadbolt and chain immediately. She avoided the garden completely. She tried to time her arrivals to coincide with other residents coming and going, never wanting to be alone in common areas. Her mother changed her work schedule where possible to be home more often. They discussed the situation in whispered conversations, her mother debating whether to report the neighbor to police or building management. But what would she report? That he had made an inappropriate offer? That he watched Lily? It felt substantial to them, but might seem minor to authorities. Her mother decided to document everything, keeping a written record of encounters and concerning behavior. About 2 weeks after the door incident, Lily woke in the middle of the night to sounds that made her blood run cold. It was approximately midnight, and she heard someone trying the handle of their front door. Not knocking, trying to open it. The handle twisted back and forth, slowly at first, then more aggressively. Lily could hear the metal mechanism clicking as someone on the other side attempted to unlock or force the door open. Her bedroom was closest to the front door, separated by only a thin wall. She could hear everything: the twisting of the handle, the pressure being applied to the door itself, testing the strength of the lock. Heavy breathing on the other side. Lily wanted to scream for her mother, wanted to run to her room, wanted to look through the peephole and confirm who was there. But fear had completely paralyzed her. She lay in her bed, covers pulled up to her chin, eyes wide in the darkness, listening to someone trying to break into their apartment. The attempts continued for what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 15 minutes. The door handle twisting, the door being pushed, the breathing. Then the sound stopped. Silence returned. Lily remained frozen, listening intently for any indication the person was still there. After several minutes, she heard footsteps retreating, a door closing across the hall, the neighbor returning to his apartment. Lily did not sleep for the rest of that night. She did not tell her mother what had happened. She convinced herself that if she spoke the words aloud, if she acknowledged what had occurred, it would become more real and more likely to happen again. She was 11 years old and dealing with terror beyond her capacity to process. She thought perhaps she had imagined it, that it was a nightmare or a product of her anxious mind. But deep down, she knew it was real. Someone had tried to enter their apartment while they slept. Someone had stood outside her bedroom wall, breathing, trying to get inside. Her mother noticed the change in Lily immediately. She became withdrawn, jumpy, unable to concentrate in school. She refused to sleep without a light on. She checked the door locks obsessively. After persistent questioning, Lily finally told her mother about the midnight door incident. Breaking down in tears, she described the sounds and her terror. Her mother immediately began searching for a new apartment. They moved out within a month, not even waiting for their lease to end, willing to lose their security deposit and pay penalties to escape. Lily never saw the neighbor again after they left, but the damage was permanent. Even now, at 24 years old, Lily struggles with severe anxiety and paranoia that developed from those months in that apartment building. She cannot sleep well, waking multiple times each night to check locks and windows. She installed multiple security systems in her current apartment, with cameras and motion sensors and backup batteries in case of power failure. She refuses to live in any building with shared hallways or floors. She researches neighbors extensively before moving anywhere, using online databases and social media to screen potential threats. Therapy has helped somewhat, giving her tools to manage panic attacks and intrusive thoughts. But the underlying fear never fully dissipates. Years after moving out, Lily's mother showed her a news article. A man had been arrested in their old neighborhood for attempted abduction of a minor. The photo accompanying the article showed the neighbor from their building, older now, but unmistakably the same person. He had approached a 12-year-old girl walking home from school, trying to lure her into his vehicle with offers of gifts and money. The girl had run and reported the incident immediately. Police investigation revealed a history of concerning behavior and previous complaints that had never resulted in charges. Lily felt vindicated reading the article, but also profoundly sad. She had been right to be afraid. Her instincts had recognized danger that adults had dismissed or minimized. How many other children had he targeted? How many had not been as fortunate to escape? Lily keeps that article in a folder with other documentation from that period of her life. She looks at it occasionally, reminding herself that her fear was rational and justified. But the validation does not erase the trauma. She will never feel completely safe. She will never stop checking locks and cameras. She will never stop scanning her surroundings for potential threats. The 11-year-old girl who froze in fear while someone tried to break into her home still exists inside her. Still listening to the sound of a door handle turning in the darkness, still waiting for the moment when the lock finally gives way, and the danger she always knew was real comes through the door. Wyatt purchased his first home at the age of 32, a milestone he had been working toward for nearly a decade. The 3-bedroom colonial in suburban New Jersey represented years of careful saving, budgeting, and sacrifice. The house was more expensive than he had initially planned, stretching his finances to their absolute limit. But the real estate market was competitive, and he did not want to miss his opportunity. The neighborhood was well established with mature trees, sidewalks, good schools nearby, and low crime rates. The previous owners were an elderly couple who had lived there for over 40 years before moving to an assisted living facility. The house showed its age in certain ways: outdated kitchen appliances, bathrooms that needed modernization, carpets that should be replaced. But the structure was solid. Wyatt saw potential where others might see work. He closed on the property in early April and immediately threw himself into renovations. The first week was consumed with painting rooms, replacing light fixtures, and beginning the process of transforming the overgrown yard into something respectable. Wyatt worked long hours at his job as an operations manager for a logistics company, then came home and worked even longer hours on the house. He was single and unattached, which gave him the freedom to dedicate all his time and energy to the property. His parents lived 2 hours away and visited on the first weekend to help with yard work. His sister came the following weekend to assist with painting. Everyone commented on what a great investment he had made, how proud they were of his accomplishment. Wyatt felt genuinely happy for the first time in years. This was his house, his equity, his future. During the second week of ownership, Wyatt found an envelope in his mailbox with no postage and no return address. The envelope was plain white, the kind you could purchase at any office supply store. His name was typed on the front in a standard font. Wyatt opened it while standing at the mailbox, expecting perhaps a welcome note from a neighbor or information about local services. Instead, he found a single-page letter, also typed, addressed to the new occupant. The tone of the letter was immediately unsettling. It welcomed Wyatt to the neighborhood, but mentioned that the house has been watched for decades, and that the writer was pleased to continue the tradition. The letter referenced Wyatt by his full name, which he found strange since he had not yet introduced himself to neighbors or received mail beyond forwarded bills and bank documents. The letter mentioned his sister who had visited the previous weekend, describing her car and the approximate time she had arrived. Wyatt felt a cold sensation spread through his chest as he read. Someone was watching him. Someone had been watching the house. Someone knew details about his life that should not be accessible to a stranger. He tried to rationalize it. Perhaps a neighbor had looked up public records after seeing moving trucks. Perhaps someone had simply been observant and meant the letter as an odd joke. But the phrasing felt wrong. Been watched for decades suggested something ongoing and intentional. Continue the tradition implied the previous owners had also been monitored. Wyatt folded the letter and brought it inside, unsure what to do with the information. He decided to wait and see if it was an isolated incident. 2 days later, another letter arrived. This one was more specific and more disturbing. It described the interior layout of Wyatt's house in detail, which rooms he had painted first, where he had placed furniture, changes he had made to the previous owner's arrangements. The letter mentioned that the writer had seen the changes and asked whether Wyatt had checked the walls yet. It made cryptic references to what was left behind and suggested that the house held secrets Wyatt had not yet discovered. The tone was possessive, as though the writer felt ownership over the property and resented Wyatt's presence. Wyatt immediately began researching the previous owners, trying to contact them through the real estate agent. The agent provided limited information, citing privacy concerns, but confirmed the couple was still alive and living in a facility about 30 miles away. Wyatt considered visiting them, but felt unsure how to approach such a conversation. What would he say? That someone was sending him strange letters about the house? Would they know anything useful? The third letter arrived 4 days after the second. This one detailed Wyatt's daily routine with disturbing accuracy. It mentioned the time he left for work each morning, which grocery store he frequented, the route he jogged in the evenings. It noted that he was alone and seemed to question when he would bring someone else into the house. The letter ended with a statement that made Wyatt's hands shake. I know you are alone. I know when you sleep. I know which window you leave unlocked. The house belongs to me. You are the intruder. Wyatt called the police that afternoon. He provided all 3 letters to officers who took them as evidence and filed a report. They explained that the lack of postage meant someone was placing the letters directly in his mailbox, which was technically illegal, but difficult to prosecute without identifying the perpetrator. No fingerprints were recovered from the envelopes or paper. The typing provided no identifying characteristics. Officers suggested Wyatt install security cameras to potentially capture whoever was delivering the letters. They increased patrols in the neighborhood and spoke to nearby residents, none of whom reported seeing suspicious activity or had information about anyone watching the house. Wyatt spent over $3,000 installing a comprehensive security system that same week. Cameras covered every angle of the property: the front yard, backyard, driveway, mailbox, all entry points. Motion sensors triggered alerts on his phone. He changed all the locks and ensured every window had secondary security measures. He felt slightly more secure, but mostly violated and angry. This was supposed to be his fresh start, his achievement. And someone was turning it into a nightmare. The letters continued arriving sporadically over the next 2 months. Sometimes 2 weeks would pass between them, other times only 3 or 4 days. Each letter contained increasingly specific and threatening information. One mentioned conversations Wyatt had on his phone while in his backyard. Another described what he had eaten for dinner the previous Thursday. They referenced shows he watched on television, books he read, packages he received. Whoever was writing them had extensive access to information about Wyatt's private life. Then came the night that changed everything. At 3:30 in the morning, motion sensors on Wyatt's security system triggered, sending alerts to his phone. Wyatt jolted awake and immediately checked the camera feeds. A figure stood in his driveway, dressed in dark clothing, facing the house. The person stood perfectly still, making no attempt to approach or flee. They simply stood there, clearly aware of the cameras, staring directly at the front door. Wyatt watched on his phone screen, paralyzed with fear and indecision. Should he call the police? Confront the person? The figure remained motionless for 12 minutes. Wyatt took screenshots and recorded video documenting everything. Finally, he called the police. The moment he finished the call, as though the person had been listening somehow, the figure turned and walked calmly down the driveway, disappearing into the darkness of the street. By the time police arrived 15 minutes later, the person was long gone. The investigation intensified after that incident, but police struggled to identify any suspects. The camera footage showed someone of average height and build wearing nondescript dark clothing and a hood that obscured their face. No neighbors had doorbell cameras that captured the person leaving the area. No vehicles were recorded on nearby streets at that time. The letters continued. More arrived over the following month, some now directly referencing the security cameras and mocking Wyatt's attempts to protect himself. Wyatt's mental health deteriorated rapidly. He slept poorly, waking constantly to check camera feeds. He became paranoid about every person in his neighborhood, wondering if the person walking their dog or collecting mail might be the one watching him. His work performance suffered. His family worried about him. 3 months after the driveway incident, he made the painful decision to sell the house. He listed it at a price that would allow him to escape quickly, accepting a significant financial loss. The story gained local media attention when the new owners also began receiving threatening letters from someone calling themselves the Watcher. A neighborhood investigation revealed that multiple families over the past 20 years had received similar letters, all written in the same style, all containing impossibly specific information about their private lives. No one was ever identified or caught. Wyatt now lives in a secured apartment building with controlled access and 24-hour doorman service. He lost over $60,000 on the house sale and spent years rebuilding his credit after the financial devastation. He sees a therapist weekly and takes medication for anxiety and sleep disorders. He obsessively monitors his personal information online, constantly checking for signs that someone is watching or tracking him. He refuses to own property again, convinced that ownership makes him vulnerable in ways he cannot control. The letters are kept in a safety deposit box, evidence of a crime that was never solved and a nightmare that never fully ended. The experience taught Wyatt a horrifying lesson about vulnerability and the illusion of safety. Locks, cameras, alarms, none of it mattered against someone determined to terrorize him. The worst part was never knowing who or why. Was it a neighbor? Someone with a connection to the previous owners? A stranger with a fixation on the property? The questions haunt him still. Sometimes at night, even in his secured building, Wyatt wonders if someone is watching. If somewhere, someone knows where he lives now, knows his new routine, is composing another letter. The paranoia never fully leaves. The violation never fully heals. He achieved his dream of home ownership, and it became his worst nightmare, one that follows him still, whispering that safety is an illusion and privacy is a lie, and somewhere, always, someone is watching. Eleanor and her boyfriend Andrew had been searching for an affordable property in the Detroit area for over a year when they finally found something within their budget. The house was a foreclosure, a 2-story craftsman built in the 1950s that needed work but showed promise. What made the property particularly appealing was the finished basement apartment with its own separate exterior entrance, complete kitchen, bathroom, and bedroom. Eleanor and Andrew planned to rent the basement unit to help cover their mortgage payments. They closed in early September, excited to begin their journey as first-time homeowners. The house needed cosmetic updates throughout, but the bones were solid and the neighborhood, while working class, seemed safe and stable. They moved in immediately after closing, focusing their initial efforts on the main floors where they would be living. The basement apartment could wait. Eleanor spent her days arranging furniture, unpacking boxes, and planning renovations, while Andrew worked his job as an electrician. They painted the living room a warm gray, replaced outdated light fixtures, and tore up the old carpet in the bedrooms to reveal hardwood floors that just needed refinishing. The basement apartment remained untouched for the first month, a project they would tackle once they had settled into the main house. Eleanor occasionally went downstairs to take measurements or check on storage items they had placed there. But otherwise, the basement was ignored. One evening in late October, Eleanor decided to measure the basement apartment for new flooring. They planned to update it and list it for rent in the spring, giving them time to complete the work properly. She descended the interior stairs that connected the main house to the basement level and walked toward the apartment door. She stopped when she noticed the door was closed. Eleanor distinctly remembered leaving it open the previous week when she had stored some boxes in the basement storage area. She tried the handle and found it locked from the inside. Confused, Eleanor went back upstairs and asked Andrew if he had been in the basement apartment. Andrew was watching television and barely looked up, saying he had not been down there in days and certainly had not locked any doors. Eleanor returned to the basement with Andrew, following reluctantly. The door was now unlocked and standing slightly ajar. Eleanor pushed it open, and they both entered the space. The apartment looked exactly as they remembered. Empty, dusty, with worn carpet and outdated fixtures. Nothing appeared disturbed or out of place. Andrew suggested the lock was faulty, perhaps sticking or engaging on its own due to age. Eleanor agreed that made sense, though something about the situation felt off to her. They returned upstairs, and Andrew went back to his television program. Eleanor tried to shake the uneasy feeling. Over the next 2 weeks, Eleanor began noticing subtle changes around the homeowner house. A window in the basement apartment that she had closed would be open the next time she checked. Small items of food disappeared from the kitchen: a loaf of bread, sliced cheese, granola bars, apples. Eleanor initially assumed she was misremembering what groceries she had purchased, but the pattern continued. Andrew dismissed her concerns, suggesting she was stressed from the move and the renovation work. Eleanor began keeping a mental inventory of their food, tracking what was in the pantry and refrigerator. Items continued to vanish. Then Eleanor began hearing sounds from the basement late at night. She would wake at 2 or 3 in the morning to the faint sound of water running, a toilet flushing, footsteps moving across the basement apartment floor. She would shake Andrew awake and insist he listen. But by the time he was conscious, the sounds had stopped. Andrew became irritated with the constant disruptions to his sleep. He checked the basement multiple times, finding nothing unusual. He told Eleanor she was probably hearing pipes or the house settling, sounds that were amplified at night when everything else was quiet. Eleanor wanted to believe him, but her instincts screamed that something was wrong. On a Saturday morning in mid-November, Eleanor decided she was going to install a new lock on the basement apartment door. She had purchased the hardware at a local store and was prepared to do the installation herself. As she approached the basement apartment door with her tools, she heard something that made her freeze. A male voice was coming from inside the apartment, casual and relaxed, talking on a phone. Eleanor stood motionless, listening. The voice was discussing weekend plans, making arrangements to meet someone later. This was not her imagination. This was not pipes or the house settling. There was someone inside their basement apartment. Eleanor ran upstairs, her heart pounding, and told Andrew what she had heard. For the first time, Andrew looked genuinely alarmed. He grabbed a baseball bat from their bedroom closet and told Eleanor to call the police while he guarded the main basement entrance. Eleanor dialed with shaking hands, explaining to the dispatcher that someone was inside their house, in their basement apartment. Police were dispatched immediately. Eleanor and Andrew waited in their kitchen, Andrew positioned near the basement door with his bat raised, Eleanor watching through the window for police cars. Officers arrived within 8 minutes, surrounding the property. 2 officers entered through the front door, while 2 more positioned themselves at the exterior entrance to the basement apartment. Eleanor showed them the interior stairs leading down. Officers descended with weapons drawn, announcing their presence. Within moments, there was shouting from outside. An officer called that they had someone attempting to flee from the exterior entrance. Eleanor and Andrew rushed to their front window and watched as officers tackled a man who had emerged from the basement apartment carrying a backpack. He was in his 30s, wearing jeans and a hooded sweatshirt, unremarkable in appearance. He struggled briefly before being handcuffed and placed in the back of a patrol car. Officers searched the basement apartment thoroughly. They found evidence that someone had been living there for an extended period. A sleeping bag was stuffed in the bedroom closet. Food items stolen from Eleanor and Andrew's kitchen were stored in the apartment refrigerator. Some of Andrew's clothing was found in the bathroom. The man had apparently been entering and exiting through the exterior door using a key from the previous rental arrangement. The foreclosure had happened quickly, and he had never returned his key. When officers questioned him, he admitted to periodically squatting in the basement apartment for the past 6 weeks. He had been monitoring Eleanor and Andrew's schedules, entering the basement when he believed they were asleep or away. The revelation that sent chills through Eleanor was what officers discovered next. The interior door connecting the basement apartment to the main house had been used regularly. The man admitted to entering the main house while Eleanor and Andrew slept, usually between 2 and 4 in the morning. He would take food, use their bathroom, watch television quietly, sometimes just walk through their home. He claimed he never intended to harm them, that he simply had nowhere else to go, and the house had been his home before the foreclosure. He felt entitled to be there. Officers found no weapons on him, but the psychological violation was profound. This stranger had been living beneath them, walking through their home while they slept, watching them, learning their routines. The man was arrested and charged with breaking and entering, burglary, trespassing, and stalking. Eleanor and Andrew learned that he had been a tenant renting the basement apartment from the previous owners for 3 years. When the house went into foreclosure, he was evicted along with the homeowners. But he had kept his key and continued to access the property during the months it sat vacant before Eleanor and Andrew purchased it. He had simply continued his pattern after they moved in, treating the basement as his space and the rest of the house as shared territory he could access at will. Eleanor could not process the violation. Every time she thought about that man walking through their bedroom while she slept, standing in their kitchen, using their belongings, watching them, she felt physically ill. They changed every lock in the house that same day. They hired a contractor to seal the interior door connecting the basement apartment to the main house, covering it completely with drywall so it could never be accessed again. They installed security cameras throughout the property, motion sensors, additional outdoor lighting. Eleanor purchased a handgun and took safety courses, keeping the weapon loaded in her nightstand. Despite these measures, Eleanor never felt safe in the house again. She could not stay home alone. Every sound made her jump. Every creak of the floor above or below sent her into panic mode. Andrew began working from home as much as possible to provide Eleanor with a sense of security, but his presence was not enough. Eleanor developed severe anxiety that manifested in physical symptoms: insomnia, panic attacks, difficulty concentrating, constant hypervigilance. They discussed selling the house, but discovered they could not afford to move. They had invested all their savings in the down payment and closing costs. They were trapped. Eleanor and Andrew decided never to rent the basement apartment despite their original plans. The idea of someone else having access to any part of their property was intolerable. They locked the exterior entrance permanently and tried to pretend the basement apartment did not exist. Eleanor installed camera monitoring apps on her phone and checked the feeds obsessively throughout every day, sometimes dozens of times per hour. She could not focus on work. She could not relax. She could not feel safe in the home that was supposed to represent their future. Years have passed, but Eleanor remains fundamentally changed. She still lives in the house with Andrew because they cannot afford to leave. But she hates every moment. She hears phantom sounds from the basement constantly, her mind creating threats even when none exist. She struggles to sleep more than a few hours each night. Therapy has provided some coping mechanisms, but no real healing. The knowledge that someone had been living beneath them, entering their private space, watching them in their most vulnerable moments, has destroyed any sense of security Eleanor once possessed. She knows rationally that the man is in prison, that he cannot return. But fear does not respond to logic. Every day in that house is a reminder of violation, of vulnerability, of the horrifying truth that safety is an illusion, and privacy can be destroyed by someone with nothing more than a key and a sense of entitlement. Eleanor and Andrew are still trying to save enough money to escape, still trapped in their nightmare, still waiting for the day they can finally leave and never look back.